Greetings from Champaign, Illinois, where we recognize and acknowledge that we are on the lands of the Peoria, Kaskaskia, Piankashaw, Wea, Miami, Mascoutin, Odawa, Sauk, Miskaki, Kickapoo, Potawatomi, Ojibwe, and Chickasaw nations. These lands were the traditional territory of these Native nations prior to their forced removal. These lands continue to carry the stories of these nations and their struggles for survival and identity. We reflect on and actively address these histories and the role that this university has played in shaping them. On behalf of my colleagues at the press and our guest panelists, I'm very pleased to welcome you to today's Publishing Symposium. I'm Lori Matheson, and I am Director of the University of Illinois Press. Established in 1918, the press currently publishes about 80 books a year and more than 40 scholarly journals with a staff of 40. Alongside our publishing activities, we are deeply committed to outreach, whether that be hosting student interns or offering events like this one, where we bring together publishing professionals with faculty for timely and informative discussions about the publishing environment, current challenges, and best practices. Before we get underway, I'd like to take a moment to say some important thank yous. First, a thank you to our sponsors, the Office of the Vice President for Academic Affairs, the Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research and Innovation, and the Research Humanities Institute here at the University of Illinois, Urbana-Champaign. Thanks to Cynthia Oliver, Vice Chancellor for Research, and her colleague, Maria Gillimbardo, for helping us conceptualize today's program. We're delighted to have a number of guest panelists here with us today, including faculty members, librarians, and graduate students. Thank you all for sharing your expertise and perspectives. Special thanks to Margot Cheney for coordinating the moving parts of this event, and thanks to our many staff members who contributed their work, both publicly and behind the scenes. Today's event is our 5th Publishing Symposium, and the second one we have offered virtually. Although this format falls short of replicating the invigorating energy of in-person exchange, we are happy that it allows us to reach audiences far beyond this campus. Thank you so much for being here. Our symposium today departs a little bit from past offerings in that the focus is less on the publishing process itself and more on what happens after your book or journal article is published. How does it make its way out into the world, and how does it circulate in the ecosystem of scholarly conversation? How do people find it, and how do they use it? How do press and author work together to draw attention to the work? And how do formal structures of promotion and dissemination, as well as informal networks, open avenues to its visibility? In other words, how do we both maximize and track the impact of important scholarly work? I look forward with all of you to the next 2 hours and the insights of our panelists. And now I have the pleasure of introducing Dr. Barbara Wilson, Executive Vice President and Vice President for Academic Affairs at the University of Illinois. In her role, Dr. Wilson oversees the academic priorities, budgeting, and academic initiatives of the University of Illinois system, which is the press's administrative home. A humanist herself, Dr. Wilson is a former dean of the College of Liberal Arts and Sciences at the University of Illinois, and her own research in the field of communications focuses on the effects of media on children and youth. She has been tremendously supportive of our outreach activities, including these publishing symposia, and we are very happy that she is able, virtually, to be with us today. Thanks again for coming.
Thank you, Lori, for that very kind introduction. And I'm so delighted to welcome all of you to what I know will be an incredible symposium. Unfortunately, as you all recognize, safety still dictates that we meet virtually, although in-person meetings are drawing ever closer, thanks in part to the many contributions that the U of I system has made to fight against COVID. But in the meantime, the U of I Press has done a remarkable job of arranging 2 online panels that are the next best thing to being there. And I know all of you will benefit from the ideas and the insights that our distinguished panelists will provide. This is actually the 3rd year that my office has teamed with Urbana's Office of the Vice Chancellor for Research the Humanities Research Institute, and the U of I Press to present workshops on the publishing process. So I'm really excited about that, the third year. And these symposia have been a really valuable resource to faculty and to graduate students, not just on the Urbana-Champaign campus, but across the UI system, across all three of our universities. And now, because of these virtual portals, this information will be available to scholars and students across the country and around the world. The goal of today's event, in my mind, is to take some of the mystery involved in the publishing arena out of the scene, and so to demystify publishing, if you will. And that topic is really crucial for advancing scholarly careers, but it's also really important to building the body of knowledge that is essential to understanding the human condition and to solving societal challenges. In these historically difficult times, publishing is more important than ever as a vehicle for sharing new ideas, for challenging current norms, and for encouraging thoughtful dialogue that will help lead the way to progress and to a better tomorrow. I know we all want that. We're all benefiting from the groundbreaking discovery that research produces and from the ability to build upon those ideas and conclusions and expand them to our various disciplines. Clearly, publishing is at the heart of that process. It does far more than just enhance the global reputation for excellence that the U of I system has carried for decades and decades. It also nurtures the ongoing conversation that is sorely needed to address the many challenges now facing our country and our world. Obviously, one of those challenges is the COVID pandemic. This global crisis has brought with it substantial hurdles to scholars and researchers, and I know that you are very familiar with those hurdles. For those in the humanities and in the social sciences in particular, libraries were inaccessible for many months at the beginning of the pandemic, and many archives continue to be unavailable. In addition to all the other challenges that we are facing, information is hard to come by. At the same time, the virtual environment has sustained us during this crisis, and it's also brought opportunities. It's forced us, kicking sometimes and not feeling too good about it, to find alternatives to in-person gatherings, creating virtual events just like this one that can reach even more people and have an even broader impact. So I like to say that's the silver lining around COVID. It's helped us to think more creatively about information dissemination and access. This symposium focuses on some of those opportunities: pathways of dissemination and discovery for journal content, and innovative marketing strategies for book projects that take advantage of virtual space and different modes of connection. You'll be hearing from experts about how to think about the life cycle of a journal article and how to make your next book or your first book stand out among so many published materials that are out there. I am very grateful to our colleagues at the University of Illinois Press for arranging events such as this one to help show us the best way forward. The press has been supporting faculty and staff across the U of I system for over 100 years, and we are so fortunate to have such a committed and influential partner in our efforts to foster change and serve the public good. So now, on behalf of my colleagues across the U of I system, my thanks to the U of I Press staff, for Lori, for her leadership, and for all the hard work that brought us here today. With that, let's get started.
Dr. Wilson, thank you so much. It is such an honor to follow her. I am your host, Elizabeth Hess, and it is my honor to be here as part of the University of Illinois Press Spring Publishing Symposium, The Life of a Journal article, Where Does It Go and How Do We Know? I want to thank everyone for joining us today to talk about the process for submitting an article, for having it published. As an author, you learn that once you've submitted this article, your role doesn't stop there. Where your article goes, it can impact your long-term career. On this panel, we will talk with the people that know the most about the life cycle of your article, and they can help you understand its impact. Dr. Laura Hetrick is an associate professor of art education at University of Illinois and co-editor of the Journal of Visual Arts Research since 2014. Dr. Hetrick's research interests include teacher identity, subjectivity, visual culture, psychoanalysis, and fandoms or fan art. Welcome, Dr. Hetrick.
Thank you.
Ezra Cheltik-Jashkun, she is a collection analyst and planning specialist at the University Library. Her specialties in data analysis, data visualization, academic libraries, and user analytics. So thank you so much for being here today. And I want to make sure that our panelists are all unmuted. We all want to hear from you for sure. And Ahu Yolach is a PhD candidate in art education at the School of Art and Design. She has a BFA in interior architecture and environmental design and an MSc in industrial design. Ahu is interested in game studies, gaming culture, critical play, virtual learning spaces, and video games and as an instructional tool. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you.
I do want to let our audience know that if you have any questions, we're going to reserve 10 minutes towards the end. You can put them in the chat and we will try to get to your questions, but make sure that you put them in there before about 4:45 and we will go through those and try to have our panelists answer any questions you have. Welcome to the panelists. Thank you for joining us today. Let's get started. Ahu, you are up first. Our first question goes to you. As an early career scholar, what are your goals in journal publishing and what are you hoping it will contribute to your career?
Yeah, thank you for your question. So as you said, I'm in very early stages of my scholar work. So I think one of my goals is, so right now I'm approaching a little bit strategically. I think because to be established in the area, I need to publish and I'm thinking about, okay, I need to publish this, like I need to have this many publications, blah, blah, blah. So I think one of my goals is that make it so that publication is a result of my work, so that my main goal is not to publish, but it's a result of my research. But to do that, I need to publish first so that I can be established in the area. So again, it's one of my goals to be respected, and it's possible through publications because it's one of the primary ways that we are communicating in academia. So I think having an identity and a stance and a voice is possible through that. So that's a goal. And again, in relationship with that, I want to be influential in other people's work. And I think, again, like in the early years, I feel like you're a little bit more like observing and responding to your work. But as you become more influential, it becomes more of a conversation and then you start having a say in the area. And I think that's a goal for me that I'm working towards that. Maybe it might be possible through people referring to me. People are saying, okay, according to you, who likes work, blah, blah, blah. So I think that's an important goal again. So to make it a conversation and not just responding to what's going on in my area. So yeah, these are my main goals so far.
Ahu, as a follow-up, do you find journal publishing is important to career development?
Yes, for sure, definitely. So I think a way I see journal publishing is that people who have been in the academia in your area for a long time are kind of telling that, okay, this is valuable work and this is work that needs to be seen. So I look at that, the publication and taking part, like, yeah, in publishing that way, so that it becomes almost a referencing and maybe vouching for you to, you know, this is valuable work. And also, I think it is a tool of feedback for me as well, because once I'm hearing, you know, especially if it's a constructive feedback, when I submit a publication and then I receive maybe like, you can make these changes or these parts are good, these parts are bad, then I think I'm having access to people that I admire through that channel. And for example, right now, Laura is my mentor and I'm very lucky to be hearing from her, but also not a lot of the grad students have that. So through her comments, I think people are having that access. And it's the same thing for me that when somebody is giving me feedback, then I'm having that kind of an access. And I think it is, you know, getting to know the area and kind of understanding what is expected for that. I think it's important. So it's an important career tool, I think.
Thank you very much, Ahu. Laura, the next question is for you. As the editor of VAR, can you describe your personal editorial process?
Sure. I looked at this several different ways. This might actually help some people who are thinking about, besides just submitting to an article, how these, or to a journal, how these things happen. So one way, I pay attention to papers that my graduate students write in some of my graduate classes. And if I think it's something that is fresh, like a fresh voice or a novel approach, I'll actually approach my student and say, you might want to think about making this into an article. You know, and if it's something that I think is definitely slated toward a certain journal, I'll push them that way. But I'm always like, but we have visual arts research right here. So sometimes I just encourage them to submit to us, to the visual arts research journal. So if they want my mentoring, I will definitely help them, but they still go through the same blind review, double blind review process. So I don't let them skip any channels. The only difference would be I sought them out and I offered help in structure or ways about going about it. But they still have to go through the legitimate process. They can't just be in because they're my student or because I know them. So I also will do that with other people. So if I'm at a national conference or an international conference and I've seen a presentation, I'll go up to the speaker afterward and be like, you might want to consider publishing that. In fact, here's my card for visual arts research. And that's one way. So I'm actually out there seeing and hearing people, and I'm like, you might want to do that. It's something that, you know, our journal would be interested in. So I never promise a publication, but I'm like, we would be interested. Here's the information, here's the website, here's the submission guideline. Well, we'll get to that. People need to read the submission guidelines. So I will actively seek people. I have even messaged people on social media. So if somebody is talking about something on Facebook related to, like, so if it's one of my like former classmates from grad school or another scholar that I know, social networking I usually use, or media I use as networking. And so if I see somebody talking about something, I will message them privately and be, hey, have you considered that as an article topic? Have you considered this particular theorist? Have you considered this particular book or article? And maybe art ed is a little bit more like, we're very much a community, and so we try to support each other. So maybe other people, I don't know if other people are doing that, but in our field, we try to be very collaborative and helpful. So we will actually like help each other out. So I will address people on social media if I see something that I think is worthy of further research, or if they're asking for resources, we all kind of chime in and help each other with that. So that's something, I mean, even when you're out there typing away on Facebook or Instagram or whatever, somebody might be considering where you can take that. But also definitely conferences. I would say I've definitely gone up to people. And then if people know I'm associated with the journal, they will actually come up to me too at the conferences. So I would say that's definitely something that has gotten us a worldwide reputation, because I tend to do a lot of international speaking. And so that's where we can really get a lot of great ideas that we wouldn't even know about otherwise, because we're coming together in these international organizations. So that's one way. The other way, of course, is just through the journals, the online journal submission. And this is probably predominantly where they come from. So once the articles come in, I go ahead and look at all of them. When I was an editor, I just sent them off to the review board without going over them. And that was a mistake, because I've had the same thing happen to me where I'm on an editorial board and somebody sends me something and I'm like, did you even look at this? This is awful, you're wasting my time. So I took that note when I was a reviewer and put it into my editorship. It's like, okay, editors, I should be looking at everything first. I mean, maybe I don't have time to read everything, but I should be looking at it. So I will review it. I'll look at the title. I'll look at the abstract. I think abstracts are really important to kind of give me a summary. It gives me a really good idea of whether or not I think it's something that will fit our journal, or if it's something that I think our field wants to hear about. If it is, and they've adhered to the guidelines, I will go ahead and send it out to the review board. And the way I do that is our review board has to list their interests or their specialties. And so I will go through that list, and I'm actually looking for something that matches the topic of the article that's submitted. Sometimes I actually just know the reviewers well enough that I know exactly who to send it to. And other times I'm reading what they've submitted and said, I am good at this. And so I'm like, okay, I'm going to send this article to you. I send it to at least 2 people, sometimes 3. And then they usually have at least a month to review it the first time. And then it comes back to me, and then I have to get back with the author. And then if there's revisions, they usually have a month to do revisions, and then it has to go back out to reviewers, and that's another at least 1 month. So publication can take up to a year, also depending on how often your journal publishes. So we only do two editions a year. So that's why it can take a year to a year and a half for your article to be published, is because it's going through all of these different systems where everyone has a certain timeline to get it back. And I have to be honest, I don't sit on my email for the journal. I have to log into the system, and I'm doing all my other things. So sometimes I'm like, oh, right, I need to go do that. I haven't done that this month. And so there's that lag time. So it's one of those things where authors shouldn't take it personally when you don't hear back right away, because your editor is a human and it also has tons of tasks, and they get to it and then they start the process. And there's a whole huge process that's kind of a little bit out of their hands of giving reviewers time. And the reviewers also have tons of things going on. And that's not the only thing they're doing. So there's this whole time that takes place behind the scenes that has little to do with the actual author or anything we feel toward you. It's nothing personal. It just takes a lot of time, and there's a lot of people involved, and there's moving parts. And then a lot of people request extensions for reviews. So, and I'm like, I get that, I understand. So I give them another couple weeks. And so then it's another couple more weeks until I get back to you. And then typically authors also request an extension. And so you can see how those little couple of weeks with each person just kind of extend that timeline. So if you're an author and you're like, wait, where's my paper? It's kind of out there. Somebody's probably aware of it. Every once in a while we become unaware of it. So you might want to send a nice reminder email. I wouldn't do a mean one, because that's also not a good thing to do. I have some stories, but I won't share those. So always be nice. People are busy, but it's not personal. So I just want to make everyone aware of that. So some of the things I look for though, I want to make sure somebody's doing something that is current, either in our field, but also society. Society right now is producing so many topics for us to talk through. Unfortunately, a lot of them are not good topics, but they're definitely things that we need to address. So I'm looking for something with currency, something that's relatable, something that maybe you're taking up a theory that we've all heard of, but in a novel way. Maybe looking at visual imagery, even from the news or some of the awful things we've seen lately. Are you analyzing it and discussing it in intriguing ways? Are you making us think differently? Or offering a contemporary perspective on a consistent topic? So there are some topics in our field that kind of never go away, but are you introducing it in a new way? Are you making me be like, oh, I've never thought of that. And the 50 years that this topic has been, talked about, you're doing it differently. So I'm looking for something like that. And it is possible. I mean, it's always, there's nothing new under the sun, but there can be. You can look at it from behind the sun or something. I would say stay away from jargon and too many buzzwords. Don't be too relevant. Don't try to put every single concept that everyone wants to hear in one paper. Choose something and do it well. Don't do everything half well, right? You want to choose something. I would say don't rehash an old topic and come to the same old conclusion. Don't just repeat what others have done. It kind of shows that you haven't researched literature in the field to know that this has already been taken up and it's already been thought of that way. So you can take up an old topic, but come up with something new. I really like articles that address relevant transdisciplinary literature, so they're outside of their field too. I think silos of information are kind of an older thing. So I like when we are, Ahu's research I know very well. She's coming from so many different areas and she's weaving them together in such interesting ways. So that's something that hasn't been done, especially with the way she's doing it. So those are things that are very intriguing. You don't have to be just within your field. Start talking to other fields, start bringing in other ideas. Let's see. I also love narrative storytelling, especially if it's relatable or inspiring. I think right now with so much going on in the world, we need inspiration. We need those stories. I think within our journal though, it still needs to be theoretically grounded. And there's so many theories out there, just choose one, make it work. And another thing I value is practical advice for scholars and practitioners. I mean, a lot of us are like, oh, it's all theory, theory, theory. And some of us are like, well, let's put theory to do something for us. I think we want to activate and employ things at this point. We don't want to just think about things. We actually want to do some things too. So that might be, I may have just over answered that question, but that's my process. I have two main ways. I either seek you out or you've sought me. And then there's a whole process behind the scenes for that.
This is a symposium. I don't think you can over-answer anything. So Laura, I appreciate your answer. All right, Ezra, let's talk about the collections aspect of it. As a collections analyst, what decisions beyond gross usage do you consider when developing collections at the library? Tell us about that process.
Sure. So in our library, we have over 50 subject specialists who manage our funds, and they make purchasing and cancellation decisions. And I help them with data. I provide data to them, either usage, search counts, download counts, and cost per use numbers. So they can make data-driven decisions. So our subject specialists, subject librarians work closely with faculty and graduate students and undergraduate students. So they have a lot of experience. They get a lot of feedback from these researchers. So sometimes even if a usage for a journal, particular journal, is not as high as expected, but we do get feedback from subject librarians like, oh, yes, usage may not be that really high that for this particular journal, but there is a faculty member who is doing research on this subject. So we cannot really cancel this. Okay, so we keep it. And at one time, I remember when we were doing a study on databases, there was a database that wasn't really used much. But again, we got a feedback from a subject librarian, and she mentioned that, okay, this is a unique resource, and this is the only one that we have really on this subject. So we still have this database. So we do surveys from time to time, and we do ask open-ended questions, and that feedback we get, that type of data, unstructured data that we receive, they are very important, and we appreciate that kind of qualitative data besides quantitative one. So we do not rely on only quantitative data, cost per use data. We get that feedback through our subject librarians, and that's very valuable to us.
Ezra, I know it's a hard balance to develop a well-rounded collection in addition to a highly used one. How do you find that balance, and how do you handle that personally?
We love to collect as much as possible, and our subject librarians are experts on that. But as you know, we have a big constraint like budget. So even if for us to keep our recurring resources, just our collection as it is right now, we do incur a inflation that is close to, like, it's between $400,000, $500,000 every year. So in order for us to keep our collection that way, we need to pay that inflation price increase every year. And we are grateful to our university leaders. They are very supportive, and we get new money from campus to pay for those increases. However, some bad years like this, so we may need to make some decisions, and we usually anticipate these years, and we do have plans, we develop plans, and we constantly work, we do surveys, we do analysis, and we collect data, and both qualitative, quantitative, and then we do, we look at cost per use statistics, and we have to identify some resources for cancellation, unfortunately. But when we are doing that, when we have to do it, it's essential for us to be transparent and communicate this effectively with faculty and other researchers. So these are important to us.
Thank you very much, Ezra. Ahu, we go back to you now. How do you decide what journal to publish in?
Oh, wow. So that's, for me, I'm still a little bit confused about it, because as Laura mentioned, so my research is pulling from a lot of different areas, and I think I'm speaking to some at some multidisciplinary level. So for me, I think I'm again like trying to strategize a little bit in terms of where I want to position myself in academia. So I'm thinking about where I want to be in 5 years, and then kind of like what that will look like in terms of publications. Because I think in some areas it is very clear, there kind of a very clear path in terms of maybe like the best ways of publishing, or whether it's like a conference publication, it's a journal publication. But I think for me, like while I have some journals that I will definitely like to publish in, I think I'm trying to think about myself as a scholar and how I want to present myself. So I think one way that I do that is I look at scholars that I really admire and look at their early work and where they published, and how that like what would it mean for me to publish in there. And also I look at newer journals that might be interesting for me, and again, as like a, since I'm a designer and doing some practice too, so I try to look at that and how these communicate as well. So that was a very hectic answer, but yeah, these are all the things that I'm looking at.
And I know that you answered part of this question, this next question, but do you seek out a journal title based on its reputation, or do you try to find one with the best fit for the scholarship? Because for somebody that's looking at, there's a lot of cross hybrid of what journals can publish, it could be overwhelming. So how do you look at it from that angle?
Yeah, I think I'm mainly looking at its best fit for scholarship. So that's the first one, but also again, like depending on what I'm focusing in my research, I'm also first scholarship, but then I'm looking at the reputation of the title, because again, as I'm speaking to different areas, maybe in a specific area, reputation of the title might be the most important. So to be acknowledged in that, I need to maybe like kind of, yeah, be able to present in that area and what is valued in that area as well. So yeah, but I think for me, it's more scholarship, and then the title is the second one.
Thank you very much, Ahu. We're going to turn our attention back to Laura. How much do citations play a role in how you are evaluated as a scholar? How much do they play?
So if I understand what you mean by citations, it's where my own work has been cited in somebody else's work, correct?
You know what, either. I'll let you answer it depending on how you
So that's
feel.
what I was understanding, is just that your work is now recognized as part of the relevant literature that in your field that other people are now picking up, and or you're providing a framework. Right, okay.
Yes.
So currently, or at least when I went up for tenure 2 years ago here at the U of I.
It sounds, do you have a preference of how you answer that? Do you have something that you feel more passionately about? I will let you choose.
Well, I'm just saying that we currently here aren't judged on citations.
Okay.
So they don't factor into, at least when I went up 2 years ago. Again, it could change really quickly.
Sure. How about when you were 2 years ago? We can talk about that. Would that be helpful to somebody coming up through the process? Talk about citations.
Yeah, I was going to talk about how 2 years ago I wasn't judged on it. I was not judged on citations. However, I know that the university where I received my PhD, they were 2 years, like several years ago, they were already being judged on citations. And the only reason I knew that is because they some of the professors contacted me because they had published in visual arts research, and they were asking me about the acceptance rate. They were asking me about the impact factor, and they were telling, and I was like, oh, wow, why are you asking me this? And they're like, well, it's now part of our tenure. Like these are different demarcations for tenure. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then they started talking about citations. So citations were now suddenly important to them too. And it scared me because I'm like, is this something now they're going to now loop into my tenure, which I hadn't been paying attention to. So for me personally, when I went through, and I don't know for the last 2 years whether or not they've instated that in my field, like in my department here, it doesn't play a part. But I think it does have a certain value to know that other people are actually citing your work and how many people are doing it. I personally don't pay attention to it. I don't pay attention to like my colleagues or my former classmates or myself. I'm part of academia.edu, so they send me these things, which actually kind of freak me out a little bit. because every time somebody searches my name, whether it's on Google or any search, they send me a notification and tell me where this person, what exact time they've searched me, what search words they used, where they were from. Anything that they read of mine is now tracked for me. And then I get these little emails that are like 325 people have cited your name on with papers in academia.edu. And I'm like, okay, I know this should be a great thing, but from the other side, I'm like, this is kind of it's a little scary too, to know that many people are now citing your name, and now you're being considered this person. I mean, I got my PhD 11 years ago, and I've been at the U of I the whole time since then. So I'm not new in the field. It's just you kind of like, wait, am I now that middle-aged field? Is that who I am? Are the people citing me? So a little bit rambling about this. It was not considered something for tenure when I went up. I think it will be in the future. I do see some value to it, but I try not to pay too much attention to it because like on the other side of it, I don't want it to like make me feel like, what, no one's citing me, so now my work's not important. I think there are certain venues for finding out, like for people finding your work. So I have very specific topics. I mean, I've branched out in several ways, but I still tend to use the same theorist to branch out in the different topics. So I know that if people are interested in that, I tend to get a lot more people citing that work if they're following those threads.
Jumping off from that point then, if citations, if you don't live or die by them, do you think there are better ways to evaluate yourself and your colleagues? Do you have some suggestions?
Personally, I do think there are better ways. I don't know that they're actually trackable by like a rubric, because more than, I think when you track numbers, when you track how many citations you have, how many publications you have, where are you published, those are all good things and those are things that we can see. But I think it kind of reifies a system that's like the individual, the person in the ivory tower, the person in the silo who is doing this research. And I kind of want to know more like how, at the local level, how are you as a neighborly scholar, like a scholarly neighbor? Like, are you collaborating with people? Do you help people? Are you mentoring people? Are you publicly engaging with people? Are you student outreach? So the things that I actually think are important, like in the 21st century society, I don't know, I think they're too subjective to actually be measured in the way that we like to measure things in order to show progress. So I don't know that we can actually evaluate people the way I would want to know who my colleague is sitting next to me at the conference table. So.
Makes perfect sense. Thank you so much, Laura. Ezra, before we ask you a couple of questions here, I would just like to remind people they are welcome to put questions in the chat. In a few minutes, we will take some time and our panelists will try to answer those questions. So now's a great time to do those. Ezra, while collection development is necessarily quantitative, do you feel there are weaknesses in these methods?
No method is really perfect, I think, but I think it's better to make data-driven decisions rather than relying on subjective analysis. Statistics are objective, and they provide a common ground for us to talk and make decisions and discuss things. As I mentioned earlier, we always look at qualitative data as well. For example, if usage is low for a resource, we look at reasons why this could be. So we ask ourselves, was there a technical issue that people couldn't get access to this resource? There might be some turnaway issues. And we look at that. We ask, has there been enough marketing for this resource? We usually have trial periods for resources, and then we evaluate them. And then we said maybe it wasn't enough time, so maybe we should give them more time. And also we look at trends. If a resource which was highly used, usage drops for that resource, we look at the reasons behind that. And if then we decide maybe we should give it more time. Maybe we know for this and this reason it's going to go up, we expect. So yes, we also rely on qualitative data.
You just mentioned quantitative analysis. Let's talk about qualitative details. If you were able to do more qualitative analysis, what kind of factors would you consider in that?
Understanding user satisfaction, user behavior and identifying researchers' potential needs. These are very important. Sometimes a resource, an article that has been downloaded, it counts as a usage, but we don't really know it was used. It was really contributed to research. And this is what we assume, but also other unstructured data is important to us. From time to time, we do surveys and we ask open-ended questions. Usually people are busy, and but in the one of the last surveys we have conducted, like response rate was 30%, which seems low actually. It is, I would expect higher, but it was in the average compared to other similar institutions, their response rates were 15–20%. So it's 30% awesome. Unfortunately, sometimes people have tendency not to answer open-ended questions because they don't basically have time. But this type of data really helps us. Because people leave those blank, the data we collect is not very rich, and we cannot do extensive analysis on it. But we greatly appreciate that data, and it's valuable to us.
Thank you, Ezra. We are starting to get some chat questions, but before we get to those, Laura, I know that there are very clear descriptions on the website, the University of Illinois Press, of how to submit, what not to submit. Will you discredit somebody if they submit a really great concept, but they haven't really followed any of the rules up to that point?
So if they have given me a wonderful paper, but it's 7,000 words and we're at 4,500, I will actually contact them personally and say, this has so much merit, I want to see this go forward, but you're over our limit, our word limit. Can you please try to cut it down? It can't be over, 7,000 is just too much. It takes away from like half of somebody else's article, the next person's article, or more, almost the whole thing. So if I find it really bad, and I have found these, I will get a hold of the person personally and actually say, I really like this, there's so much going for it, but we have to cut it down. And if they have no idea what to do, because I mean, as authors, we all think every word is important or we wouldn't have put it there. If they ask me for advice and I have the time, I will actually say, you know what, this section here can maybe be taken out. You can maybe thin this part. So I will, if they ask, and I really want this article, I will offer that. I will go ahead and say, yes, go ahead and take this part out, maybe shorten your introduction, maybe lit review, maybe just state this and footnote it as opposed to the paragraph. So yeah, I will. It has to be valuable enough for me to want to do that. So they're not completely out. But sometimes it just gets frustrating when like everything that comes, there's 20 submissions and every single one of them has not followed the guidelines. Because it's much more work on my side, and I'm going to be the one that's going to stop that before I send it to the reviewers, because 7,000 words is so much more to read than 4,500, and it takes up literal space. And for those that don't know, in a journal, if you go over your space allotment, you pay a lot of extra money to publish that. And so a lot of journals don't have that kind of a budget to actually pay for your paper to be too long. Plus we want as many people as we can possibly get into one edition also. So, I mean, I guess the long answer to your short question, sorry about that, was if there's a lot of merit in it, I will, but I'm going to contact them and see if they can potentially shorten it.
And Ahu, can you speak to the fact that when you're submitting something, you have to follow the JPEG allotment and the pixels of a picture and the very details? Can you talk a little bit about how important it is so that when the editor receives the materials, they don't have to sort through it and come back to you for the right sizes or the right anything?
Yeah, to be honest, I don't think, I don't know, that's maybe my perception, but I don't think a lot of the editors are as nice as Laura. So my expectation is that if I like do something wrong, then I just don't get in, no matter how well I wrote. So for me, I usually get very kind of careful about those. And I know that there are a lot of, I mean, I understand it because then when you're publishing, you probably like want it to be in a certain way, and then it's extra work from coming from who knows how many people. So yes, it is a little bit restricting, but also I like to follow that restriction to make sure that like higher my chances of being published.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Can I go back to what she said? I think that's true, because even as me as an author submitting to other journals, if you didn't follow the guidelines, they just kick it out. So that actually happens more often than, say, if I'm going through it and I really like something. So
follow the rules is what I'm hearing from both of you.
Follow the rules.
We have gotten to, we have a few questions in the chat. I'd like to have some time so we can address those. From Emma, she'd like to know how authors can improve the readership of their articles, how journals can do the same. Who would like to address that one?
Improve the readership?
Yeah, how to improve readership of an article, and how do journals do the same? So how do you get somebody who writes an article to increase their readership?
So one thing that we actually do with visual arts research, we have a Facebook page, and we, if there's a call for papers, especially for our special edition, we put that out and we market that, and we'll do it from our own accounts, but we also do it from the actual journal account. We put it into every single society that any one of us belongs to. So national societies, international societies. So we really try to just be like, hey, this is our journal, it's so great. And we put it out there, and we encourage the authors to, like, especially for like the special editions, to do the same thing. Authors is a little bit harder for you to do that because you don't want to put your work out there too much for someone else to steal it before it's published. So plagiarism plays a part where you maybe don't want your access, like putting it out there. I have seen people put papers out there, like unpublished manuscripts, but you're really risking yourself that those ideas being stolen and presented by someone else first. So for an author to get, for readership, I guess on your side, that's a little bit harder, but from our side, we definitely try to promote people. We just try to like let people know, like, hey, our new issue is out, here are all the people, and if we know them personally, we tag them in the actual thing, or in the actual post. So we try to do our part in social media, because that seems to be where people are most of the time. When you log in, people's little green dots are always active. And so we use it, and it seems to work really well for us.
Before I ask the next question, I do want to let you know that this approach is working for VAR. Your usage has grown quite a bit, and social media is a huge driver of usage. So it's working for you. Let me ask you this, Ezra. I mean, you have so much to focus on in collections and acquiring. Is social media an aspect of your job as well?
Not myself, but it might be our subject librarians, really. I think it would be their part of their daily life, but not mine really.
But the library does have a social media, a pretty busy online presence. Okay.
Yes, and we do have many people following up on social network.
That's great. Okay, thank you so much, Ezra. Another question in the chat from Fan Wu. Are editors expecting articles that are already perfect, or articles that have the potential of becoming a great article? She has a personal anecdote. She wants to know how developed or perfect the paper has to be before she submits it.
So the question was, do you want it perfect or almost perfect? Yes. The closest to perfect is the best, because it's going to take a lot less revision on your part. If something is really well done, the reviewer gets it back way faster. I can send it back to the author way faster, and you have little to do, so you can get your confirmation of publication very quickly. So the more perfect it is, the better. We also do go by potential. So if we see something that is really there and it just needs some work, sometimes the editors will actually be the ones to sit down. Well, we can't sit down anymore. We will email you. Actually, most people are not from the area anyway, so it was never a sit down. It was always an email conversation or Skype back in the day. If we really see something and we're like, this really needs to be heard, we will take that time, at least with our journal and our 2 editors, to help that person develop that idea, because we really want it out there. Sometimes we don't have the time to do that. So it doesn't mean that it's not a great idea. It just means that potentially, like, that we ourselves don't have the time to help take you there. So I would just say, Potential, definitely, but perfect is way better. But there is no perfect article. Almost every, I don't know that I've ever seen one not go back with some kind of a revision. Revisions are usually always, they're always going to be there. The rewrite, the one that's much larger, where you actually have to like reconceptualize or rewrite entire chunks of it. But revisions are a little bit lighter. And I don't think I've ever seen anyone or sent anything back without some kind of a revision. But don't let it scare you. And also don't let rejection scare you. That happens to all of us, no matter where we are in our career. So just keep going back, keep doing it. Don't let it get you down, because it did for me when I first started out, my first rejection, and I'm like, I might as well just quit. I just can't do any of it. But you just submit to another journal potentially too, or you really take the feedback. If you have an editor, like a reviewer that gave you a lot of feedback, really consider it. It might hurt at first, but again, they're really just trying to put the best scholarship out into the field. And so if you are open to that constructive feedback, you can do it.
Are there levels of rejection in that this was a great concept, but it's still pretty rough and needs help? And or this is not going to work for us, but maybe try a peer, or finally, this is, you know, we appreciate your time, the standard, but no thank you. Are there levels of rejection?
Yes. I mean, there's not that many buttons to click in the system. So typically just there will be rewrite and resubmit, or rejected, I think is like the worst. I mean, it's not, that's just, those are the options we have of what we can actually communicate. But then from there, like within me as an editor, I do have different ideas of like, okay, has merit, but maybe not for my journal. And I will take if I know a journal that it will fit perfectly, I'll tell them that in the email. Be like, it's not a good fit for visual arts research, but you should consider this particular journal because this is something I have seen recently. You should send it there. So I try to, I mean, I understand that we're all people. We all have feelings. I understand being on both sides of this process continually. And being an editor has really helped me understand like submitting better too. So I think if you treat everyone with kindness, even in rejections, I mean, there's a kindness in that too.
Thank you very much, Laura. And I also want to tell you that your answer to the perfect, almost perfect answer, she really appreciates it. That was very helpful.
Great.
We have another question. Here's a complicated one again about citation. Are there metrics beyond citation that count, that are helpful in measuring impact? Do you understand that question? Are there metrics beyond citation? So are there other ways that can measure impact? If you don't understand, if you're unclear with the question, I can ask Emma to re-clarify it, and I have another question for you, unless you have an answer, any of you.
Well, I think there are different, like a lot algorithms that do this for us, like how many, like the readership, like how many times the particular journal has been looked at or clicked on, or particular articles. And I think I would defer to Ezra for that. Like I'm not on the analytics side of it, but I believe there are things out there that they're checking more than just citations.
I think like measures like H index. I think that also that becomes a it is important when evaluating authors. But for us in the library, we also look at the cost. But for impact, we look at how much a particular journal gets used, and but for authors, I think H index is also important, and I know Altmetrics, they are also developing criteria to evaluate authors. But for journals, we mainly look at downloads. For databases, we look at search counts. For journals, mostly downloads. That's what we look at.
Have the metrics changed a lot, Ezra, since in the last 14 months since the pandemic started? Have you seen a spike or a drop?
Oh yes, there is a huge spike, especially for ebooks. We have seen a big increase in usage, and also journals. For ebooks, I think it was like 1.75 times higher than pre-pandemic usage, and journal usage has jumped also. We have seen increase all over our resources. And now we are making print material, just scanning it, or if we can find an online version, we are sharing that with our users upon request. That has increased a lot too. We work with Trust to make that content available online, and we have seen huge increase in that.
Ahu and Laura, I ask you a similar question. In terms of submissions, have you seen a spike or a drop in the last 14 months?
For me personally, I was on sabbatical, so my co-editor would have the answer to that. I have not logged into the system. I'm letting him finish out the semester, and then I will be completely immersed. So I apologize. I don't have that answer.
That's okay. We can give.
I'm hoping that since people were home, they had more time to submit. But I mean, I was home and I did not, because everything was just a little off for me. So it was like I was taking in information and I was making outlines, but submitting, and some journals I know went offline. They were just like, we're not accepting because, you know, life is a little bit weird right now. So I know, at least in my own field, I know some journals went offline for last year. They weren't accepting, they weren't publishing.
Who did you want to add to that? I saw that you were nodding. Did you want to contribute?
That's my feeling too, but also I think conference papers have became a little bit more available since now that people can present their pieces online. So I think there is some like for me personally, if I needed to choose, I think I chose conferences a little bit more if I won't have a chance to go to, you know, a conference in France, and now I can present in there and publish. So yeah.
I think Laura speaks for all of us when she says that the last year has been a little off. I think you speak for a nation when you say that. And we only have a couple more minutes. So Laura, you have the final question directed for you.
Okay.
Has your idea of what kind of material you're looking for changed during your tenure as editor for the journal? Not necessarily the last year, but in general?
I think so, because I think the topics since 2014, so that's 7 years. Wow, 7 years. The topics, the current topics in our field are always changing. We're like interdisciplinary field, we kind of pull from everything. And so what's been important has changed, but also some of the people that were heavily publishing are retiring too, which is a whole another thing in higher ed with like budgets and different things. It's all connected in this really weird way. So again, another long answer to a short question. Yes, I think what I'm looking for is different. I'm also a little bit more open to helping mentor potential, like the other question, you know, does it have to be perfect or can there be potential? I'm more open to looking for the potential and helping junior colleagues or graduate students get to that next step, because I've just been through that process and I know that it's like, I really could have used some help. I think I'm going to be the one, I'm in that position of power, let me use it, you know, in the most constructive way of, hey, you have potential, let me help you to that next step, because I know what it means. I know what those numbers, like that publication is one of those markers that we recognize in the field. So I think that is a way. I think topics have changed based on currency, based on the society. We have a lot more to talk about or work through. And I think art education specifically, is a great way to work through a lot of those things. That's a whole nother lecture though, not this one.
Another day, we'll come back. Thank you for joining us for the University of Illinois Press Spring Publishing Symposium, The Life of a Journal Article, Where Does It Go and How Do We Know? Thank you to Margot Cheney. You implemented the successful symposium, your last before retirement. I do want to thank Lori Matheson, Director of the University of Illinois Press, for all of her support. Thank you to my supervisor, Alexa Colella. I would not be here interviewing you and doing this without her constant support as well. Dr. Laura Hetrick, Ezra Chaltik, Josh Kuhn, and Ahu Yolach. I know you're all very busy. I know that we're all Zoom weary, but this was incredibly valuable. And I am so grateful that you decided to spend your time with us today. So thank you all very much.
Thank you for having me.
I know we're going to take a short break now, and then we'll come back.